Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Christina Richmond.
And me, Rory Duncan. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello again, Christina. How are you doing?
Hey. I'm well. I know that we are an hour closer because we have not put our clocks back, and you have.
Yes,
right? No.
yes. I'm feeling it.
We're an hour closer.
I'm an hour closer. I know. I'm still gradually adjusting to feeding the cats, who, of course, their tummies say that it's not an hour closer, that it's exactly 5 a.m. So that's a little bit of a challenge at the moment. But also, we're recording this on Halloween.
That's the other thing. Yes, of course, folks will be on the other side of Halloween by the time they listen to this. So we hope it was spooky and filled with cute outfits here in the U.S. And what do they do in Edinburgh?
Well, so there's this thing called guising, which is...
Guising,
which is, this, it's quite an ancient art. It's before the whole trick-or-treating came along. And guising is when the kids go out, they dress up, and in order to get some kind of reward, they have to do something. They have to sing a song, say a poem, play a musical instrument, or say a joke, give a performance. And it has to be, quite good so that you get your reward. It's not just about dressing up. And that's quite an ancient tradition going back many hundreds of years. Yeah, absolutely. And you would have, because we don't have pumpkins here in the UK, or at least we didn't until...
No?
So we would get, turnips and gourds and things and carve them out. And costumes, of course, didn't exist, so... The mums and dads would sew, cut out old pillowcases for eyes, and they would have kind of ghost type costumes on and sheets and things, or they would have very strange and grotesque masks that had been passed down over the generations. So
I quite like the doing something for the reward,
right.
rather than trick or treat and they put out their hands or they grab in the candy.
I know. Well,
basket.
They would. When we lived up in the north of Scotland, which is quite a traditional place, the guising was taken very seriously there. Even though there was more dressing up, there's a kind of modern influence. The older folk in the village where we lived were very serious about, no, you have to sing a song, and people would sing traditional shanties. A girl appeared with her violin and did a sort of short Scottish jig on the violin, which was good. People were reciting poetry. Somebody recited something in Gaelic. Yeah, it was quite very, very traditional. I think in Edinburgh here, in the capital, it's less so. It's probably more commercialised now. However, I do have a bowl of Haribo.
Do you?
Other candy is available. It's a bowl of Haribo candy, or sweets as we call them here, ready and for the young ones. See what happens. I don't mind with the young ones. The young ones often are the very first time they kind of go out, and they'll appear as it's getting dark. And then I'll hand all that out, and we'll just kind of close the door and switch the lights off, because the older ones can be a little bit wilder. So
a little bit of a rabble-rousing crowd.
Yeah. Anyway, anywho, as they say, Christina. We've got follow-up from last week.
Not just follow-up from AWS's outage. There is that. There was more, right? But also Azure and Google, they also had outages. And didn't we find a graphic that showed that they all were out at the same time?
Yeah. I know.
That's weird.
Well, it's odd because it kind of begs the question, does that mean that some services on one hyperscaler platform are linked to services on another platform? I don't know. But I think I mentioned to you earlier this week that poor old Microsoft, the outage happened on the day of their earnings announcement, which wasn't the best.
No good.
But it even affected their own service outage page where you would normally go website.
Right.
So they had to
go and get help.
You couldn't. So they had to put those notifications on X, and X was working.
Yeah.
So there we go. It seems as if cascading outages is very much the thing of the moment. They're
It
not
is, and
new.
didn't it also impact a Scottish vote, the
Yes,
outage? Yeah.
it's kind of a bit weird that the Scottish Parliament, small as it is in a very small country that we live in, they were having a debate on, I think it was some kind of land reform legislation, and they couldn't proceed or do the votes on it in
Mm,
the Scottish Parliament because it was an Azure-based service that they were using to conduct the voting, I believe. So I think they just
interesting.
went home early. So it kind of, yeah, exactly. It
They
permeates
just
into
packed it
every.
in.
Yeah, I know. They're probably the least technically aware or capable organization in the country, but still, even they were affected.
Hmm, that's interesting. And then there was a follow-up on there's some retribution occurring from China to the Netherlands,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It looks as if there's then that was the Nexperia story we had. It appears as
That
if
was
it was.
last week, eh? The
Yeah, it was.
Nexperia story. That was just to remind folks that was the Chinese-owned company that the Dutch government had decided to enact a 74-year-old law. Doing what, Rory? Help me remember. It was
Uh,
to
yeah, basically to take.
oust the CEO or take
Well,
over.
they to take over the company because they were concerned
Mm,
that the CEO was planning either to shutter the company and take the business or take the manufacturing facilities or capabilities over to China, and or supposedly or allegedly those trade secrets would go with them. So there was a
mm,
concern that it would suddenly disappear, but also I think it meant that I think a bunch of folk had been laid off, which isn't legal according to the Dutch
mm.
Works Council. The same applies everywhere. Yeah.
Apparently or allegedly because they had spoken out against what the CEO is doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anywho, the Chinese reportedly are dismantling this branch now. Is
Yeah.
this the retribution?
Well, this is what the fear was. I think after the conversation between the Dutch industry minister and then the Chinese probably industry ministry, they had a kind of minister to minister discussion. I think things seem to have sorted it out. I think it appears that it might be being positioned as a kind of a rogue incident. In other words, one
Yeah.
individual perhaps taking an initiative that he shouldn't. It's pretty clear that the Dutch and the Europeans want to have manufacturing capabilities of this
Mm-hmm.
type in Europe, of which there isn't that much going on. Typically, the industry is dependent largely on other parts of the world. So if there is a potential risk that that's going, whether intentional or not, even if the rumour would potentially spark this reaction by the relevant government organisation. So I don't think anything's necessarily going to change. I think it was the alarm bells were rung and the Dutch authorities took action for what they thought was going to happen. So fingers crossed, everything should settle down.
Well,
Mm.
good. So that was just an update from last week. And listen to that episode, guys, if you haven't, because it was kind of an interesting story, both of them, I think.
Yes.
But coming up this week,
Mm-hmm.
Miter Tech has a new release,
Mm-hmm.
some significant changes
Yep.
to their defensive part of the framework. So that'll be fun and interesting to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Also, I was reading an article that talked about cybersecurity firms seeing a huge increase in AI-powered attacks across Africa, and
Mm,
particularly in the case of deepfake. So deepfake fraud
wow.
has nearly tripled in the past year. So that's kind of scary.
You know, I was reading something in a magazine this morning, and it was a little quiz asking about who or which company had the highest inflation rate. And do you know it's Nigeria? Something like
Mm.
26%.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah,
crikey.
it's really high. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's above 20. Maybe I'm misremembering, but it was quite high. It was above 20%.
Mm-hmm.
China was negative 0.4, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
also you have to question how the numbers are reported,
mm-hmm.
right?
I think so.
Yeah, enough about inflation. But yeah, who do we have as our guest today?
So this week's guest is Charles Henderson, who's the EVP and head of Division Hex at
Oh,
Coalfire. So we'll be chatting
okay.
with him about offensive, defensive, managed security services.
Coalfire is one I've known since, way back in the day. I've been tracking them since 2013, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
12 years. They've really gone through a lot. So it'll be great to catch up with Charles. He is ex IBM X Force, if I
Mm-hmm.
remember correctly, and I believe he started their red teaming at IBM X Force, and then he also was at Trustwave in the Spider Lab. So he's definitely got quite a nice CV, and it'll be interesting to chat with him about those three topics.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, just to kick things off, a few general updates. Folks, sign up for our free monthly newsletter, Signal Not Noise. You can do that at richmondadvisorygroup.com. I almost said the wrong thing there, but I was looking at the wrong page. I was trying to ad lib, trying to remember what the heck I was going to talk
Uh-oh.
about. Yeah. And then when you subscribe, you'll be sent a 4-page extract from our AI security survey, which is looking at how prepared CISOs, C-suite, and senior IT practitioners are to face AI-powered attacks, which, of course, we are increasingly talking about on this show. But also what would help them to prepare for that. In other words, what can be done to make things a little bit easier in the life of the CISO and others making these decisions. So that was the newsletter, folks. Just sign up when you get a chance. So this week's special guest is Charles Henderson, EVP and Head of Division Hex at Coalfire. Welcome, Charles. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sure. So we're going to be chatting with you today about everything to do with offensive, defensive, and managed security services, amongst other things. So again, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on some of those.
Now, it's not offensive as in snarky security, right? No, offensive and defensive security. It's an area that I've studied quite a bit, Charles, and I'm really excited to chat with you about it. And of course, managed security as well. The first question we usually jump in with is just what keeps you up at night? And I imagine there is not just one thing. It's probably a boatload of things that can keep you up at night. Am I right?
Well, it's actually a ton of things, but I think it can probably distill it down to one issue that we have in security, and that's budgets. You think about the
Mm,
average CISO today; they're being asked to do more with less, and every day they're being asked to, how can we save money? How can we how can we do this more efficiently? And the big problem here is that the criminal elements are making more and more money on this. They're getting higher ROIs, and they're willing to fund that R&D, that research, that operation. And you're really putting your average CISO in a untenable position
hmm
when you're saying do, do more with less while the opposition is doing more with more.
Well, and just tagged onto that is some of the targets on the backs of the CISOs in terms of SEC regulation. I've heard from some folks that this administration may be loosening some of those targets, but we saw a lot of responsibility put onto just one member of the executive team, the CISO, in certain breaches that occurred. We can name them, but most people know who they were. And in some cases, it was for good reason that the person involved had not maybe done some of their due diligence. But a lot of times, that responsibility is more of a collective responsibility. It's more of a board plus executive team plus CISO. And when you're trying to do more with less, to your point, you're also worried for your reputation and your effectiveness, and you're worried that there could be some um, litigious event that occurs after a breach that impacts you. It's kind of throwing salt into the wound of what you just said about not having enough budget.
Well, not only are we asking those in charge to do more with less in terms of mounting actual defenses, but we're also giving them auxiliary jobs. And there's the reporting requirements have gone way up, true,
Mm,
but so have just a lot of the day to day job of the CISO. you have a lot of things that they're now focused on that, may or may not directly move the needle. And I think all of the requirements on their own are well-meaning, but in concert, it becomes a lot of noise for a CISO. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of what I would say, I'd say one of the holdups for your average CISO is what to focus on. You get sort of decision paralysis where
Yeah.
you're constantly in a state of what is my most important thing to do. And a lot of what I think the security industry has started to focus on, I know we're focused on it, but I think it's a larger effort, is getting that CISO the information they need to make a decision, but also helping them with the decision that they need to make. And sometimes it's not exactly clear what it is you're deciding, and that's a huge problem if you're also worried about a world in which, as a CISO, there's no takesies backsies once you've been breached. It's it's sort of, you don't get an
I like
opportunity to
that.
say, hey, we made this decision wrong, Mr. or Mrs. Threat Actor, whatever country, we'd like a do-over, we'd like a mulligan. It just
Yeah.
doesn't work that way. So
So you're in the business of seeking out vulnerabilities, doing pen testing, red teaming, helping the CISO and his or her team see where the challenges are, what they need to fix, and probably helping them prioritize that, from what you just said. And then you're also in the business of mop up on aisle three with defer or incident response, right? And you've been in this world for a long time. And I know we talked when you were at IBM, and we talked when you were at Trustwave, and here you are at Coalfire, having stood up Division Hex and running Division Hex. What is the sweet spot for helping the CISO with all of that morass of data, from whether it's offensive or it's defensive? What is the most important thing that moves the needle for the CISO, do you think? And maybe it's not one thing. I mean, that's kind of, silly of me to say one thing, but what would be a list of the top things they need to be able to make informed decisions about where they need to bolster their whatever it is, infrastructure, monitoring, what have you?
so I think it really is an element of, don't just put all your effort into one thing.
Mm,
One of the things when we're talking about what we're doing for clients, whether in any of my stops, it's always been, if I could sum it up in one word, programmatic. I see a lot of CISOs gravitate to a single solution as sort of the end all be all silver bullet. This is going to
right,
get
the
us there.
silver bullet. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do because candidly, marketing sort of tells us that there's a million silver bullets out there.
That's
But
right.
but the truth of the matter is that security is a programmatic approach, and it's not an absolute destination. It's a process, and a lot of people have said that before, but it's true. And if you can get to the point where you have a multi-layered approach focused on detection and response, not just on the vulnerabilities themselves. You mentioned red teaming, not just penetration testing, red teaming where you're,
Yep.
and
Yep.
ad sim where you're looking for gaps in detection and response. You're not going to build a castle moat that's going to keep people out. Somebody in
No.
accounting is going to click on a link and you're going to be done. There are a million reasons why you need to take that programmatic approach. But it's not just on the offensive side. Look, my background is in, vulnerability research and on the offensive side. True, but there's a reason that I'm such a proponent of the IR services, not just the cleanup on aisle 5, but also the proactive helping your blue team be better services.
Yeah.
I say
Go for
something
it.
shocking. Things like threat hunting are not just reactive services, because a lot of
Yep.
times when you engage in a threat hunting exercise, and I see a lot of people that do like normal threat hunting with their blue team, but they're not engaged in getting an outside resource to come in and do like a really deep dive threat hunt. And the reason that that's so amazing is when you bring in somebody from the outside and you say, hey, I want to know what my problems are. And they go and they engage in, a true threat hunt. A lot of times they say, hey, I have really good visibility in this part of your organization, and I don't have great visibility over here. The only other time you get that kind of assessment about your visibility is during a cleanup on L5. And that's the absolute wrong time to get it.
Right.
And,
yeah.
and as somebody that has spent their life talking about gaps in detection, vulnerabilities, whatnot, I'm here to say, look, that is important. You need to keep doing it. But you also need to start looking at things through a blue lens. What does my team see? What is my team capable of seeing? Because if you ask the team, they can see what they can see. And there's nothing surprising about that because it's the same thing they could see yesterday. Saying what you don't see is a very difficult thing.
I actually don't think it's shocking. And maybe the fact that you were prefacing your statement with it's shocking and my not seeing it as shocking is that the market at large may think it's shocking because we're so used to just stand up the program as best you can, do what you've always done, and then if you need cleanup, you'll get more insight, but that insight is relevant only to the cleanup. And I 100% agree with you that that insight needs to happen before the incident occurs because we have to be making our programmatic efforts, our tooling, much richer, much more tuned ahead of time. And it's a hard thing to do because the set it and forget it, the buy the magic bullet, all of these mentalities, if you will, are very human mentalities. We don't want to go looking for problems, Charles. I mean, we have enough problems in our day-to-day. Why should I go look for problems within my program that seems to be humming and my tooling seems to be configured properly and I've done a lot of my patching? Why should I go look for anything else, right?
There are a lot of checkboxes in life, but security is not a simple checkbox.
And I love what you were saying about helping your, the blue lens, the helping your blue team. I've always been an advocate for have the plan, test the plan, practice the plan, do a cyber range, event where you're bringing in people who aren't usually testing or practicing the plan. You bring them together, give them different roles, have them try on the PR hat, have them try on the CEO hat, or have them try on the HR hat, because it is a team sport when you're in the middle of a breach, and how you manage that breach, not just technically, but in terms of your business, is really going to matter. So I've been a huge fan of proactive threat hunting and looking for the vulnerabilities ahead of time, but also having a plan and practicing the plan.
Ultimately, your red team is going to help your blue team prepare.
Yeah.
But, there's this saying in sports, defense wins championships. Well, it's true because your defense in security is what is going to get you either retained or fired as a CISO.
It is a good thing to look at is the defense. I do know a lot of really successful CISOs who, and success is such an arbitrary word, but I do know folks who are successful in taking a risk approach and trying to prioritize which risks, first of all, are not the accepted risks that they know they have to, ameliorate, and then looking at the cost versus reward scenario that they have to look at in that budget thing that we were talking about earlier, right? What do you think about a risk approach?
Well, first of all, I always liken a risk approach to sort of the system in blackjack. You will, eventually the house will win because what you're really doing is playing the odds and saying this is the least likely thing to kill me. So I can ignore the thing that's least likely to kill me.
Right, and then it kills you because you weren't paying any attention on it. Yeah, it's a good point, but you can't do everything.
But you have to prioritize. Budgets are limited.
Right.
And so, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, we are helping our clients prioritize a lot of times. And it is the right approach. You can only do what you can pay to do. That said, I think the people that are successful for the longest with the risk-based approach, and I say the longest, the people that are successful with a risk-based approach are those that do it with a threat lens. In other words, they're relying on threat
Mm,
intel, and they're
yep.
making those risk-based decisions based on actual intel rather than gut
Hmm.
feeling or generic advice on the internet or
Right.
whatever it is.
Or generic risk assessment, which is the tick the box exercise.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
actually have to
And
quantify the threat that is targeting your asset and then the cost of that asset going down to your business. You have to quantify that.
100%. And look, we routinely see people engaging in some level of risk assessment to sort of determine the first steps of their security program. And we engage in those risk assessments. And I can tell you that when we do it, we rely heavily on threat intel that is, industry specific to sort of, I guess, we're talking about that lens earlier, to give the proper lens to what the risks are. Because just saying in a generic fashion, hey, your risks are most likely this because that's what everybody's risks are, that is a path to failure. So if
Yep.
you can start to say, these are the threat groups you should be worried about. Here's, their TTPs. Here's, if you can start to narrow your focus and even get down to the point of these are the kinds of vulnerabilities and problems you need to worry about first, and the emphasis on the first, not you need to worry about, but you need to worry about first, and you
First.
can get to
Yep.
that priority, you can engage in an informed spend, we'll call it,
Mm,
that's going to be more effective. But of course, if you're focused on 10 things, the 11th thing is the most dangerous.
right. Well, let's bring in insurance to the conversation because, insurance, it's kind of, cyber insurance has become like healthcare insurance, where if you really want to be healthy, you're going to go outside your insurer's list of things that you can do up to whatever the amount that they will let you do it. You're going to either spend beyond that or you're going to spend outside of that. At least that's my experience with our current healthcare system. So in cyber insurance, what I've seen, and having covered this market for 10, 15 years now, insurers got involved because they were asked to, B, there was money to be made. But now they are also regulating exactly how much the hourly amount for incident response or any other services that are around that proactive area that we've been talking about. They're starting to be very involved in, here are the programmatic elements you have to tick the box on. Again, another tick the box exercise. But they're also limiting and regulating things that can be done to help be proactively prepared, I think. And I've been watching this for a long time, and I'd love your education on this, your thoughts on insurance, and what the best way is to work with carriers in today's market. I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that, Charles?
So, a lot of times when the insurance is reimbursing you for certain costs, they'll reimburse up to a certain point, and people take that as
Mm-hmm.
a limit. Let's go back to the health analogy real quick. If you're worried that you may have, a certain, really bad disease that if caught early is curable, and you have the means to pay for it, and your health coverage doesn't pay for it, you will more than likely go out of pocket because getting a terminal disease is not okay just because your health insurance pays for it. Okay. There are repercussions that extend beyond the dollars and cents of what you're willing to pay for healthcare. Okay. So if you have the means, you're going to pay for those diagnostic tests. Security is kind of the same way. If you engage in insurance, they're not limiting you. They're just saying, look, if something happens, this is what we'll pay for. Okay? If you decide that you need a better level of care, you may have to supplement that out of your own pocket. Now, is insurance worth it? That's for an actuary that's going to spend a lot of time, cranking the dollars and the cents and all of that. But what I can say is, if you are outsourcing your risk tolerance along with the decision to go with insurance, you're making a horrible mistake.
I love that. Say that again.
And the insurance company would tell you the same thing. We are not your North Star for risk tolerance. We are instead making our risk judgments based on the policy that you have, and you need to make your judgments as an organization as well.
And I think, sometimes we take shortcuts and we do outsource our risk tolerance to, like, I'm just going to have the insurance policy to back me up, and I'm going to just not handle some of these risks I know exist because, hey, I've got insurance. And you're right, that is a horrible idea.
The backstop in baseball doesn't mean that you can forgo a catcher, you know?
It's true. No, but it's a good analogy, and you can't forego the catcher. And in some ways, the insurance provider is the catcher, but in other ways, strategically, you need a catcher to be talking to your pitcher to make sure the right ball is being thrown. So
I think of them as more the backstop. I think of
Yeah.
them more the backstop. I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of CISOs think about your insurance program as the catcher, but no. You ultimately you field your own team. Never confuse the fact that the insurance is that is a supplemental team that is there to help in cases of disaster, right?
Yeah.
And they're going
Yeah.
to help control some of those costs.
Yeah. It's a catastrophic policy, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we've kept you for the time that we asked you for. We want to, give you back. We want to honor your time commitment. But this was so fun, Charles, and I think we should do it more frequently. So thank you so much for taking time with us today, Charles. This was a lot of fun. We'll have you back on, and really appreciate your time today.
Hey, Eve, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, let's do some news now, Christina. Tell us about a MITRE attack.
Everyone uses MITRE ATT&CK, and I think it's such a brilliant government-funded tool, set of frameworks that folks use. And there was a moment, was it a year ago? It was a little bit ago, that was talking about, oh no, it's defunded. But the government came to its senses and renewed the funding. So with that new funding, in part, I'm sure, they have made significant changes in the defensive part of the framework, which I think is great. It's a widely used knowledge base for adversary tactics and techniques, right?
Yeah.
It talks about, the groups, the campaigns, the software. But now what they're doing is they've added 2 new objects to its detections. One is called detection strategies, which defines high-level approaches for detecting specific attacker techniques. And then there's the analytics piece, which provides platform-specific threat detection logic. And I think both of those are great, right? Because as you're going through your detection, you might not know all the strategies with which to look at specific attackers. And so that's awesome. And then also the analytics, looking at that threat detection logic so that you can understand how others have gotten there, how they've used the logic to understand that threat actor specifically. I think those are both really great additions. What do you think, Rory?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like the fact that they've called out specific things that are reflect the way that we see attacks going in terms of the bad actors and what they're targeting. They call out software linked to supply chain attacks, for instance, cloud identity exploitation, and also attacks aimed at virtualization and edge systems. And these are the places that are, fundamental to modern cloud and AI infrastructure in particular, this kind of build out of virtualized networks, virtualized infrastructure. So putting more focus on that is super important. The other thing that Nadia just mentioned there about supply chain, we're seeing more and more attacks aimed at the supply chain, particularly for retail and manufacturing companies.
Right.
So I really like the fact that they've called that out. And the second thing that I liked, in addition to what you talked about, was what they were talking about on the mobile side of things. So additional coverage has been added for adversaries that they say are abusing the linked devices feature in applications like Signal and
Right.
WhatsApp. So
Mm-hmm.
there we go. Again, another very practical, very up-to-date example of trying to address those specific vulnerabilities in those specific applications.
Right, and that actually had been deprecated in version 7. I mean, we're now up to version 18, but back in 7, they took out the linked devices feature. But there have been some pretty significant outages and or hacks into Signal and WhatsApp.
Mm,
And so I think they realized they needed to bring those back, which is
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, so
and
that's
then
good.
critical systems, the
Mm,
industrial control
mm-hmm,
systems. That's the other
mm-hmm.
area where they added some things there, which I think is great because it's part of the whole challenge. I think, especially in a globalized world where we are poking some of our adversary nation state bears, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
which we regularly do.
Yeah,
And so the attacks, I'm sure, are continuing
yeah,
into ICS and critical infrastructure. So,
yeah.
yay, good on them, MITRE. I'd love to catch up with them, actually. Maybe we should have a briefing from them
Mm,
because they really do great work.
great. Yeah, that would be good. I think that's a really great idea. Okay, the second news item of the week is that not slightly sinister, quite sinister, and a little alarming, is that cybersecurity firms are seeing a huge surge in AI-powered attacks across Africa, the very large and vast continent of Africa. And this is something
Wow.
that I took from dark reading,
Mm.
and where AI technology is being used by cybercriminals to boost the effectiveness of phishing campaigns and execute impersonation attacks
Oh, wow.
using deepfakes. Now,
Mm.
none of this is unique, right? But
No.
what they're saying is that the level and rate at which this is increasing has been very alarming. So, deepfake related fraud has apparently nearly tripled in the past year. This is according to the threat intelligence firm Group IB. Meanwhile, phishing is the most common attack against African organizations, with attackers using AI to produce, and get this, to produce native sounding messages and automate campaigns to achieve a much higher click through rate. So
Mm.
here's the thing here, and this is something that if you live in a regional part of the world where there are highly varied accents, of which in most countries there are, often a really local accent is seen as more trustworthy than a nationwide one. In the same way as, for instance, in Scotland, somebody with a local Scottish accent is seen to have more credibility or trustworthiness than perhaps a strong
Mm.
English or
Interesting.
received English accent. There's lots of studies in that. So, for instance, here in Scotland, if there's an advert on television for, I don't know, laundry liquid or something, if you're in, I'm just thinking because if you're in England, it will have the English accent or an estuary English accent or whatever. In Scotland, they'll either have a Scottish one or the Irish one. And it's funny because you're like, who the heck is this? They have an Irish celebrity on. It's because in Scotland we would give credibility to the Irish accent more than to the English accent. So they do this like 2 or 3 versions of things, presumably, and then the advertisers will have them playing in the different regions. But back to the serious topic, which is in Africa, because of course Africa is a nation of many, many languages, several hundred
Yes.
different languages, of course. And if cyber criminals are able to use AI to create these deep fakes, which of course they can, even if there's hundreds of regional accents or languages, they can scale that massively using AI deepfake technology. That's a real problem. That really addresses and touches on where people would have the most trust in a language that they speak or that they would
Right.
consider as a very small
Mm.
number of people, therefore it must be believable. What do you
They would
think?
lean in.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would lean in on that if it was something recognizable. I think also it comes down to some other things in Africa. It's country dependent, of course. We can't
Mm,
do a broad brush on this, but I think there is underdeveloped digital infrastructure. There's uneven literacy when it
mm-hmm.
comes to the digital sphere, especially rural areas,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then there's a dearth or a shortage of skilled cyber people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those definitely make the certain regions of Africa more susceptible than others to these types of deep fakes and phishing attacks. And I think there's also fragmentation. I'd have to go review this again, but I think there's inconsistent or fragmented sort of regulatory standards across the country. So you take all those things together. I love what you said about the language. I think that makes a lot of sense. Then if you combine maybe a rural area, less consistency in terms of any policy or regulatory control, and you take some of that digital immaturity perhaps, or literacy, lack of literacy, I think it's very ripe then for these attacks. But why now? Right? Why now specifically? Why are attackers saying, "Oh, let's turn our attention there"? I wonder. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question. I think perhaps because if you think up, let's say Western Europe, if you look at the growth of economies and investment and so on, we've had relatively slow growth and GDP growth and spending since the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. It's been very slow to recover, whereas places like China, Africa have been heavily invested in, and that it hadn't really affected them in the same way. Therefore, their infrastructure and adoption rate is growing vastly more quickly. Therefore, for the cyber criminals, they see that as an opportunity.
Well, interesting news articles that you've pulled out. We've also been chatting about the fact that OpenAI quietly unveiled an AI agent that finds source code vulnerabilities and prescribes patches, and that's fascinating. So we were joking around this morning about we're doomed, we're saved. But really, it's the fact that the agents at some point may be fighting it out between them, right?
Yeah. I think in many ways, and it brought it home. I can't remember what I was watching the other day, but we had a discussion, my wife and I, and there's always this question of if you have individuals or groups or technology or robots or whatever with superpowers, let's just say, whether it's superintelligence or they can fly or they've got telekinesis or whatever. Yeah, no, but if you think about it, the assumption through our popular culture is that they do these things for the good of the planet or for, the benefit of mankind or whatever. It's very altruistic. But of course, since then, we've seen things like after the reinvention of Batman and as the Dark Knight, and then a series such as The Boys, I don't know if you've watched that before, where it calls into question the ethics and the kind of legality of having individuals or entities with superpowers. How are they then watched over? How are they then regulated?
Right.
Who, the whole who watches the watchers? And it's from, I think, the Alan Gibson comic, The Watchmen was a good example of that. So my question is, if we've got agents that are going around looking for vulnerabilities and patching them, who is watching them? Do we need agents that effectively are regulatory agents, or who will check the work that these other agents are doing? Do we have agents needed to watch the agents? I think there's more discussion to be had on that one.
Oh, absolutely. And we keep chatting with folks about this, so stay tuned for more on that front. And we'll be doing a survey in the new year on agentic AI, and also PQC, the post-quantum cryptology or cryptography, I guess it is.
Yeah.
PQC. Yeah.
Right. Even if you've got any ideas for questions, folks, send them in. We don't guarantee that we'll use them, but always happy to give you a name check if we do. That's probably that's as much as our marketing budget can afford.
Yeah. And on that note, so that you can reach out to us, get in touch. You can find me at Christina at richmondadvisorygroup.com, and Rory, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at the same place, which is, well, not the same address. It's Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com. And it'd be great to get some feedback from you folks about what else you might like to see in the show. And with that, we thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.